Aisha had always been a woman of strength and resilience, traits that were shaped by the hard life she had endured since childhood. She grew up in a small village where she learned early on that nothing came easy, but she always believed that with hard work and faith, things could improve. When she married Hamiza, she found the happiness she had longed for. He was her companion, her support, and together they built a simple but love-filled life. But not everything is as we imagine, and suddenly a great storm descended upon her. Hamiza's sudden death left Aisha stunned, as if the ground had been pulled out from under her feet. The pain was unbearable, but unfortunately, she had no time to succumb to grief. With a young child to care for, Aisha was forced to be strong and carry on. The weeks following Hamiza's death were a whirlwind of emotions and responsibilities. Bills piled up on the kitchen table, each one seemingly screaming for a solution she didn't have. And as if that weren't enough, came the worst news a mother could receive. Little Eric was gravely ill. The diagnosis was another unbearable blow, leaving her breathless. Trips to the hospital became frequent, and with each visit, the list of medications and treatments grew. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming for Aisha, as she watched her son wither away and didn't know how to handle it. The little money she had saved quickly evaporated, and with it, the debts began to pile up. Desperate, Aisha started looking for work with more urgency, knocking on doors she never would have imagined before. Then came the opportunity to work as a secretary in a large company. When she received the call to come in for an interview, she didn't think twice and rushed out, believing it would be a great opportunity. She left Eric in her mother's care and headed to the office. The grandeur of the building reflected the power and influence of its leader, Mr. Duro, a man known both for his business acumen and his harshness. Aisha knew little about him, but the stories circulating were not exactly encouraging. They said he was a man who achieved his goals at any cost, someone who rarely heard the word no, and who had a gaze that could freeze anyone's soul. Still, she needed this job. It wasn't a matter of choice, but of survival. With sweaty hands, she entered the office, trying not to let herself be intimidated. Standing in front of the feared boss's office, Aisha knocked softly on the door, waiting to be called in. Mr. Duro greeted her with a cold look. He was handsome and imposing, with a presence that filled the room. Aisha felt small and vulnerable but knew she couldn't show weakness. As Mr. Duro spoke about the responsibilities of the position, his eyes wandered unsettlingly, as if he were evaluating something beyond the words. After a long conversation where he described his criteria and demands, Mr. Duro finally informed Aisha that she had gotten the job. Grateful for the opportunity, she couldn't hide her happiness at finally having a job that could sustain her household. The next day, she started working, dedicated to proving that she was capable of performing her role perfectly in the company. But despite the happiness from this small victory, she couldn't forget her son for a second, as he was in fragile health and far from his mother. Aisha tried to convince herself that she was doing the right thing, that working was the only way to ensure a better future for him. But the anxiety was there, gnawing at her peace. Every hour that passed, she wished she could call home just to hear her mother's voice saying that everything was fine, that Eric was getting better. But she couldn't afford to be distracted on her first day of work. When she was finally just a few blocks from home, already preparing to relax and shower her beloved son with affection, the phone in her bag rang. Aisha felt a shiver run down her spine. At this hour, a call could only mean something was wrong. Her mother's intuition wouldn't deceive her. She quickly answered, and it was her mother on the other end of the line. "Aisha, come quickly to the hospital. Eric is very sick." For a moment, the world around Aisha seemed to stop. The noise of the street, the people, the cars, all became an indistinct blur as she tried to process what she had just heard. It was as if an invisible hand was squeezing her chest, taking her breath away. "What happened, Mom? What's wrong with him?" she managed to ask, though her voice was thick with fear. But her mother's reply was short, cut by worry and urgency. "I don't know, dear. He started to look pale and the fever won't break. The doctors have already taken him inside. but you need to come now." Without thinking twice, Aisha hailed a taxi and rushed to the hospital. As the car sped through the streets, Aisha felt her heart tighten in a way only a mother fearing for her child could understand. What if she arrived too late? That dark, terrifying thought haunted her the entire way. Aisha finally arrived at the hospital. Her little Eric was there, surrounded by doctors and nurses moving with urgency. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. Her son, so fragile, so defenseless, was fighting for his life, and she felt powerless, completely at the mercy of what the doctors could do. What if that was the last moment she would ever have with Eric? What if she never got to hear his laugh or see his eyes sparkle again? The following minutes were the longest of her life as she watched the doctors work with precision and speed, doing everything they could to stabilize little Eric. Finally, one of the doctors looked at Aisha and gave a slight nod. "We've managed to stabilize him," he said, but his tone was cautious. Those words should have brought relief, but Aisha knew the fight was far from over. Eric's condition was now stable, but that didn't mean he was out of danger. She approached hesitantly and looked at her son. He seemed so small in that bed, surrounded by tubes and wires monitoring every heartbeat, every breath. Sitting by his bedside, holding back tears, she said, "Mommy is here, my love. You're going to be okay, I promise," she whispered, even though a part of her doubted whether she could keep that promise. It's a moment of despair, one that only those who have experienced it can truly understand, right? What do you think will happen to Eric? Leave your comment below, and if you're enjoying the video, give it a like and subscribe so you won't miss any new stories. Aisha could barely keep her feet on the ground when the doctor, with a grave look, called her into his office. As she entered, the sight of the serious doctor and the way he avoided eye contact only fueled her worst fears. "Your son's condition is critical," he began. "We need to perform urgent surgery to stabilize him, but the risks are high and the cost is significant." Those words echoed distantly, and Aisha felt the ground open beneath her feet. The idea of losing her son and the pain of not being able to afford the surgery were about to crush her completely. The sight of the doctor discussing details she could barely comprehend mixed with desperate thoughts about how to come up with the money she didn't have. The question that echoed in her mind was cruel and incessant. What am I going to do now? Every minute in the room felt like an eternity as she tried to process the impact of that devastating news. Morning came, and Aisha hadn't slept a single minute. Her mind was a chaos of thoughts. She had to go to work because now more than ever, she needed that job. Her son depended on it. Once again, Aisha left Eric in his grandmother's care. That day felt endless for Aisha. Every minute dragged on under the weight of worries that suffocated her heart. She tried to focus on work, but her mind was far away at the hospital with Eric. The fear of what might happen if she didn't get the money in time was like a constant shadow. When the clock finally signaled the end of the workday, as she was packing up to leave, the phone on her desk rang. It was Mr. Duro calling her to his office because he needed some important documents for a multimillion-dollar deal he was about to close. It was at that moment that Aisha had a risky idea, but it would be her only way out of despair. Seeing all the wealth of her boss, she decided she would ask Mr. Duro for the amount needed for the surgery. She had been there for just 2 days, and any misstep could mean the end of her career before it even started. But desperation spoke louder. Aisha didn't know anyone else who could lend her the money besides her boss. When she reached the office door, she took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions consuming her, and walked in. Mr. Duro was sitting with his eyes fixed on some documents in front of him. He looked up when Aisha entered but said nothing, only gestured for her to come closer. Aisha handed over the papers he had requested. While Duro reviewed everything, she struggled to find the right words. How could she ask for something so delicate? Finally, when he finished reviewing the papers and placed them on the desk, Aisha saw the opportunity. She couldn't hesitate. She took a deep breath once more, and before her courage failed her, she spoke, her voice slightly trembling. "Mr. Duro, I know I've been here for a very short time and that this might be inappropriate, but I'm in an urgent situation and need to ask you a favor." She paused for a moment, observing her boss's reaction, who was still focused on the papers in front of him, not looking up. The tension in the room seemed to increase, but Aisha knew she couldn't stop now. "I need $200,000 for a personal emergency." The request hung in the air between them, without an immediate response, as her boss continued to show no reaction, remaining focused on the documents. She felt her nervousness grow with each passing second. She was aware that she was treading on dangerous ground. A sum so large, having been at the job for just a few days, and without offering detailed explanations. But desperation spoke louder at that moment. Finally, Mr. Duro rose from his chair with an almost unsettling calm. He was a handsome man, but there was a coldness in his demeanor, an absolute control that made it clear why everyone in the company feared him. He began to walk toward Aisha, each movement charged with a silent authority. Aisha couldn't avoid the tremor that overtook her body, tears threatening to form in the corners of her eyes. She had put everything on the line with that request. Without saying a word, he stopped right in front of her while Aisha struggled not to break down and to stay strong. "I know this is an unusual request, sir, but I'm willing to pay it back and have it deducted from my salary. I just need that amount now for an emergency." Finally, he broke the silence. It was the end of the workday in the building, and the company was practically deserted except for the two of them when Duro spoke coldly. "I will give you the amount you requested." Those words should have brought immediate relief, but instead, Aisha felt her heart race even more. Something in his tone of voice and the way he was looking at her made the fear and uncertainty intensify within her. It was as if, instead of a solution, she was about to step into even more dangerous territory. For a brief moment, she just tried to process what he had said, but before she could respond, Mr. Duro continued. "But there will be a condition." "Condition? What condition could that be?" Without averting his gaze, he took a step forward, closing the distance between them in an almost intimidating manner. Aisha felt the tears threatening, but she held them back. She was aware that regardless of what was to come, she needed to be strong for herself and for Eric. "I'm listening," she said, this time more firmly, trying to muster all the courage she had. "I will give you the $200,000, Duro said directly, without any pretense, "if you spend one night with me." Aisha's world seemed to stop, and she felt her body tremble slightly as she tried to process what she had just heard. Never, not even in her worst nightmares, had she imagined she would hear something like this. She knew Mr. Duro was an imposing and powerful man, but this proposition was something that crossed all the boundaries she thought existed. The image of Eric, fragile and sick, appeared before her eyes, bringing a wave of despair that almost suffocated her. All she wanted was to save her son, to find a way to pay for the surgery that could restore his health. But faced with that cruel condition, Aisha felt trapped in a corner. Her body, her dignity, everything was being put to the test as if fate had placed her in front of the greatest challenge of her life. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Her eyes filled with tears that she struggled to hold back. "One night," she repeated in an almost inaudible whisper, still looking at her boss, searching for any sign of regret or humanity in his eyes, but all she saw was coldness. Noting Aisha's discomfort, he then said it would be just one night and that only the two of them would know. Still in shock and feeling like the worst woman alive, Aisha had no other choice but to accept the proposal. He then gave her an address where she could meet him at 8 p.m. Aisha left the room and, when no one could see her, broke down in tears. The journey to the hospital seemed endless. When she entered the room, little Eric was sleeping deeply, still weakened. Aisha approached slowly, trying not to disturb the little rest he had managed to get. She leaned down, bringing her face close to his hand, feeling the delicate touch of her son. "I will do everything to save you, my love," she murmured softly. There was little time left before her meeting with Mr. Duro. The clock in the hospital seemed to be running faster than usual. Aisha took a deep breath, trying to find strength as she left for the designated location. When she arrived at the hotel, she was greeted by a host who guided her through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly. The host stopped in front of a door, and for a moment, Aisha hesitated, almost unable to move her feet. The host opened the doors with a smooth motion, revealing a beautifully decorated room with a luxury that, under any other circumstances, would have dazzled her. But now, that room felt more like a prison cell from which she knew she would emerge a completely different person. As she entered, she found Mr. Duro sitting, waiting for her. He again said nothing, his gaze cold and calculating. Aisha struggled to maintain her composure as the door closed, sealing her fate. Duro came toward her, and without any gentleness, he began to undress her piece by piece, leaving her dignity on the floor along with her clothes. Aisha closed her eyes, trying to disconnect from reality, convincing herself that it was all just a nightmare from which she would soon wake up. But his touch, the invasion of her body, and the brutality of the situation were all real, painfully real. Time in that room seemed to drag on, each second a silent torture. Aisha focused on breathing, on staying present, even though her mind wanted to flee to anywhere but there. And then, finally, it was over. He moved away, leaving her alone for a moment, soon returning with an envelope in hand, the payment for the most painful act of her life. He extended the envelope to her, and for a brief moment, his eyes showed something that could have been compassion. With trembling hands, Aisha took the envelope as tears streamed freely down her face. She turned away, trying to hide her despair, but it was impossible. Mr. Duro, perhaps trying to mitigate what he had done, tried to wipe her tears, but the gesture was rejected. Aisha, with a firm voice laden with pain, said, "It's done. I've fulfilled my part of the deal." Those words, so simple and direct, carried the weight of her shattered soul. Aisha left the room without looking back, each step harder than the last. As she crossed those corridors once again, she knew she would never be the same. What was left of her now? She didn't know, but at least Eric would have a chance. The next day, she woke up with her body feeling heavy, as if all the emotions from the previous night had solidified within her. It was her day off, but the sense of relief at not having to go to work was mixed with the whirlwind of thoughts and feelings that wouldn't let her find peace. Even with her heart still in pieces, she prepared herself and went to the hospital to get everything ready. That same day, little Eric had the surgery, which was a success. She was taken to the room where Eric rested, still under the effects of anesthesia, but with a much more peaceful expression than in the previous days. Seeing that little body fighting for life, Aisha felt a wave of relief, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. The tears that had once been of pain were now of relief. Despite her heart still being shattered by what she had to do, she couldn't contain the joy of seeing her son well. Aisha was back at the company. The feeling of discomfort was constant, as if she were trapped in a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. She wanted never to have to look at Mr. Duro's face again, but the need to support her son kept her there, standing firm. Whenever Mr. Duro passed by, Aisha did everything she could to avoid meeting his gaze. Her eyes were fixed on the ground or in any other direction that wasn't his, as she tried to control her breathing and keep her hands steady. On one of those days, when work extended late into the night, Aisha was focused on finishing an urgent task. The office was practically empty, and the silence only heightened her anxiety. She was nearly done when she heard a sound of footsteps that was unmistakable. Instinctively, she lowered her head, trying to hide, as if she could become invisible. But to her surprise, Duro didn't pass by. As she realized he was approaching, her discomfort and shame paralyzed her. She wanted to disappear, to flee from that place, but she was trapped by both fear and necessity. He stopped beside her desk, but instead of what Aisha feared, his voice came out calm, almost casual. "It's late. Go home. You can finish what's left tomorrow." She simply nodded, unable to say a word. Mr. Duro looked at her differently, his penetrating eyes revealing something Aisha couldn't decipher. He seemed tense, as if he had much more to say than what his words had revealed so far. After finishing his words, her boss turned as if to leave. She let out a sigh of relief, imagining that the strange interaction had ended. But something unexpected happened. When he was almost at the elevator door, Aisha noticed Duro returning. With her thoughts tangled, she wondered, what does he want now? Before she could even open her mouth to ask, he stopped in front of her with an indecipherable expression. And to her complete surprise, he did something she would never have expected. He knelt before her. The scene was surreal, almost unbelievable. The great and powerful Mr. Duro, always so serious and imposing, was kneeling, his face marked by a mixture of regret and desperation. Aisha could barely breathe. Her hands trembled, and she could hardly believe what she was seeing. Why? What is he doing? She thought, frightened. The silence between them lasted what seemed like an eternity, until Mr. Duro's voice broke the silence, but not with the authority he usually had. It was a lower voice, almost a whisper, and she could barely believe the words she heard. "Forgive me. Please forgive me," he said in a tone that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. Unable to meet Aisha's eyes, he was completely confused. Awkwardly and trying to find a logical explanation for what was happening, she attempted to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. Her throat was dry, her heart pounding. "Why?" she finally managed to ask, her voice faltering, almost a whisper as well. "I was a monster. I should never have put you through all that. I need you to forgive me. I can't find peace living like this." Overwhelmed with surprise, Aisha felt confusion take over. Without looking back, she ran out of the room, tears threatening to spill from her eyes, leaving Mr. Duro alone and without an answer. After that day, Aisha decided she could no longer work in that place. The mere idea of seeing him every day was unbearable. She began looking for jobs elsewhere, sending out resumes and attending interviews, determined to start fresh, far away from all that turmoil. At the office, she avoided crossing paths with him at all costs, keeping her head down and focused on her work when he was nearby. Duro, in turn, tried to maintain appearances, disguising his look of regret whenever their paths crossed. But behind that facade, he was devastated. The memory of that night tormented him even more after he learned the reasons why Aisha allowed herself to endure that situation. Duro felt like the worst man in the world. He wanted to make amends, but how? Aisha didn't want to see him. He couldn't get her out of his mind despite it being such a shameful and humiliating moment for her. But that woman attracted him in a way he never imagined. Something inside him had broken. Duro remembered her words, the desperation on her face, and how he had treated her without the slightest compassion, ignoring her humanity in exchange for his own selfish desire. Since that night, Mr. Duro couldn't get her out of his head, finding himself constantly lost in thought, reliving every moment of that conversation, every expression of pain on Aisha's face. He was desperate over the harm he had caused. Duro learned that Aisha was looking for a job because she no longer wanted to see him, and he became even more tormented at the thought of losing her. He couldn't talk to her because he knew Aisha didn't want any contact, so he used a strategy to promote her within the company, hoping she might change her mind. Unaware of this, she was extremely happy about the promotion, but even so, her desire to leave the job remained. Duro also began sending her flowers daily as a secret admirer, while he watched from a distance to see her reaction. It was one of the few moments when Duro could see Aisha's beautiful smile. A few days later, she finally secured a new job with a competitor who called her because of her impressive resume. Mr. Duro was informed that Aisha was leaving the company. He could hardly believe it. Still shaken but without showing his feelings, he sent for Aisha to come to his office. Feeling very uneasy and trying to stay calm, she went to speak with her boss. When she entered, Duro quickly locked the door, making Aisha even more nervous in the room. As he locked the door, Mr. Duro approached her. But this time there was no coldness in his eyes. There was something deeper, something she didn't expect to see in this imposing man. "Aisha," he began, his voice laden with a vulnerability she never imagined hearing from him. "I know you're about to leave the company, and I know that maybe it's the best path for you. But before you go, I need you to listen to what I have to say, even if it's difficult." She remained silent, trying to control herself. But something in his voice made her pause. "Since that day I made you that horrible proposition, my life has become a living hell. I've become a prisoner of my own actions, reliving every second of what I did, every cruel word I spoke. I was a monster to you, and the guilt, the regret have been eating me alive," he finished, taking a step back as if he needed space to breathe. "I promoted you myself in the hope of fixing something, of at least giving you a chance at a better future. I sent flowers every day without the courage to sign my name, just to see a little light in your face, hoping that maybe, for an instant, you could find a bit of peace. But none of that erases what I did." She felt even more surprised by these confessions. A part of her wanted to scream, another part wanted to cry, but all she could do was stand there, just processing every word he said. "I understand if you can never forgive me," he continued, "but I needed you to know that I'm not the man you met that day. At least, I don't want to be anymore. I should never have done what I did, and the regret is something I'll have to live with for the rest of my life." After all those words, Aisha simply said, "Thank you for the job opportunity, but I'm already leaving." She didn't want to discuss the matter any further and wasn't ready to forgive him. After leaving Duro's office, Aisha felt a mix of relief and confusion. She was determined to move on, but part of her couldn't ignore the impact of his words. As she prepared for her new journey, something unexpected happened. She received an anonymous letter containing details about Duro's past, revealing that he had been the victim of a cruel betrayal in his early years as a businessman, which had turned him into the cold man she knew. Additionally, the letter hinted that someone within the company was trying to destroy both Aisha and Duro, someone who was manipulating them for their own purposes. Intrigued and scared, Aisha decided to investigate further. She realized that leaving the company could leave her and her son even more vulnerable. So instead of leaving immediately, she chose to stay a few more days, pretending she was still in the process of transitioning, to find out who was behind the conspiracy. Aisha began to approach the older employees, trying to gather information about Duro's old alliances and rivalries. And that's when she discovered the truth. The real enemy was an old associate of Duro's, someone he had betrayed years ago and who was now seeking revenge, using Aisha as a pawn in his game. With her heart torn between anger over what Duro had done and the understanding that he was also a victim of circumstances, Aisha found herself facing a difficult decision. She knew that to protect her son and her own life, she would need help. But the only person who could offer that help was Duro, the man who had humiliated and destroyed her. Reluctantly, but determined not to be defeated, she decided to confront Duro once again, this time with the information she had discovered. When she entered his office, she wasted no time on formalities. "I know what happened to you in the past, Duro. I know about your old associate, and I know he's trying to take down both you and me." The surprise on Duro's face was evident, but he quickly regained his composure. "How did you?" he began, but Aisha interrupted him. "That doesn't matter now. What matters is that we're being manipulated. If we want to get out of this, we need to work together." Duran, still shaken by the revelation, felt torn. He knew he had lost Aisha's trust, but now, with a greater threat looming, he had no choice but to accept her offer. Together, they began investigating who was really behind the maneuvers within the company, using Duran's position and Aisha's newfound insight to piece together the puzzle. As Aisha and Duran's investigation progressed, they discovered that Duran's former associate, now a powerful businessman with deep ties in the industry, was manipulating actions within the company to destroy it from the inside and leave both of them in ruins. He was also using veiled threats against Aisha and her son to force her out of the company and leave Duran vulnerable. The tension reached its peak when Aisha received a direct threat. If she didn't leave the company within 24 hours, something terrible would happen to Eric. Desperate but determined to protect her son, Aisha went to Duran for the last time. "I can't keep doing this. I can't put my son at risk," she said, tears in her eyes. Duran, understanding the gravity of the situation, decided it was time to end the game. He arranged a meeting with his former associate under the pretense of negotiating a truce, But in reality, he planned to confront him with all the evidence Aisha had gathered. At the meeting, tensions erupted. Duran, with Aisha's help, exposed the entire plot to his former associate, threatening to take the information to the police and the media if he didn't back off. The former associate, furious, revealed his true intention: to destroy Duran and take over the company for himself, regardless of who got in the way. However, Duran, now strengthened by Aisha's support and the rediscovery of his own humanity, managed to turn the tables by recording the entire conversation and sending the evidence to the authorities. With the former associate arrested and the threat eliminated, Aisha finally felt safe. The relief was palpable, but something else had changed between her and Duran. During the intense days they worked together, Aisha began to see a different side of Duran, a vulnerable side, filled with regret and a desire to be a better person. And Duran, in turn, saw in Aisha a strength and determination he had never encountered in anyone before. The woman he had hurt so deeply had become the person who helped him redeem himself and fight for something greater than himself. That night, after everything was resolved, Duran invited Aisha for a final conversation in his office. "Aisha," he began, his voice now carrying much more than just formality. "I know I've done terrible things, and I don't even know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for all the pain I've caused you. But over these past few days working by your side, I realized something I never imagined. I've fallen in love with you." Aisha remained silent, surprised by the declaration. Her heart beat faster, but she was still cautious. "Duran, I don't know what to say. This is so unexpected. After everything that happened, I thought I could never forgive you." Duran stepped closer to her, his eyes sincere and full of emotion. "I'm not asking for your immediate forgiveness, Aisha. I just want you to know that you've changed my life. I was an empty man, full of resentment, but you showed me what true strength is. You've made me want to be a better man, not just for myself, but for you." His words touched Aisha's heart in a way she didn't expect. There was something different about Duran now, a sincerity, a genuine desire for change that made her want to believe he really could be different. She felt tears streaming down her face, but this time, they weren't tears of pain or anger, but of hope. "Duran, I've started to feel something for you too," she admitted. "But I'm still hurt. I need time to heal my wounds, but I think that maybe, just maybe, we could find a path together." Duran, emotional, gently took her hands. "I'll be here. No matter how long it takes, I'll be here for you, waiting and trying to be the man you deserve." With those words, he pulled her into a gentle embrace, the first true gesture of affection he had shown her. Aisha felt her heart calm in the warmth of the embrace, feeling for the first time that there could be a future where both of them, despite all the suffering, could find happiness together.